On Sunday, the first hour, we learn Tanya. Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach v'Yisala. With the help of God. We're learning Perek Vov. And we're someplace on page 20. We're someplace on page 20. The world, Baruch Hashem, is filled with illnesses, with diseases. Instead of having problems, you give it a label, and now it's not your fault, Baruch Hashem. So I also have a disease. My disease is repetition. Repetition. I have to repeat things again and again and again. I get stuck on an approach. That's how we teach it.
But isn't that a way when you repeat things?
I'm making a joke. I'm making a joke.
Oh.
And what have I been repeating since we started Perek Vav? I think this is our 5th or 6th class on Perek Vav. Is that there's a Zeliyum Mazeh. There's a Zeliyum Mazeh. There's a Zeliyum Mazeh. What's the Zeliyum Mazeh? When you talk about the Nefesh L'Kis, there's Etzem Koiches Levushim, inside, middle, outside. So we started learning this Perek Vav. The Alter Rebbe is giving us the Zeliyum Mazeh. The difference is that it's not equal time. You understand? The Alter Rebbe doesn't dedicate as many lines to the Nefesh HaBahamis as does the Nefesh HaLekis, because he's not a politician running for political office. You understand? He's Teire. But there is a Zeliyum Mazeh. Just like there's a Etzem of Nefesh HaLekis, there's a whole question about an Etzem of the Nefesh HaBahamis. We talked about that a whole class. Just like there's Koichetz and Chushim of the Nefesh HaLekis, there's Koichetz and Chushim of the Nefesh HaBahamis. We talked about that for 2 classes. Now I want you to know that we talked about Koichetz and Chushim of Nefesh HaLekis. It took us 15 classes. Because I went through each one. I went through Chochmah, I went through Binah, I went through Das, I went through Chesed, Yevurah, Teferes, Netzach, Yesed, Malchus. And I even did Re'iyah, Shmiyah, Tam, Re'ech, and Mishush. The 5 senses. And after I did it, I realized I should have done it better. But okay, everything has a tomorrow. But everybody present, all of us. Take her from the yad now, mamish. So we did koiches, and then we did levushim. Machshava dibamais, thought, speech, action. Just like you have the levushim of Nefesh HaLekis, the levushim of Nefesh HaBahamis. That was the beginning of this perek. Then we moved on to the next topic. Just like when he talks about the Nefesh HaLekis. After he discusses Etzem Keiches, the levushim of Nefesh HaLekis, the Alter Rebbe talks about what you do with the Nefesh HaLekis, which is Teir and Mitzvahs. So when he talks about the Nefesh HaBahamis, it's the same thing. After he talks about the Etzem Keches and Levushim of Nefesh HaBahamis, although he doesn't give him the same amount of time, he turns to the discussion of what you do with the Nefesh HaBahamis. And he gives a label. The Alter Rebbe gives a label. Has a label. Now labels, of course, are not allowed in America. Labels. Because everybody is very sensitive, yeah? But if you could, Rachmana Litzlan, be so evil and contemplate a label, if you look on page 20 of your Tanya, or Daf Yud Amud Beis, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in the top of the page, the Alter Rebbe gives you a label. What's the label? V'hein hein kol ha'maisim asher nasim tachas ha'shemesh asher hakei lehevel v'roitz ruach. That's it. That's the label. What do you do with the Nefesh HaBahamis? With the Nefesh HaLekis, you learn Teirah and you do mitzvahs. Machshava is connected to Limud HaTeirah, Dibur is connected to Tefillon, whatever else. And Ma'aseh is connected to Kiyum HaMitzvahs. When do you use your Machshava, Dibur, or Ma'aseh of your Nefesh HaBahamis? I'll read it to you again, okay? Kol ha'maisim asher nasim tachas ha'shemesh asher hakei lehevel v'roitz ruach. That's the quote. Anything you do that's tachas ha'shemesh, it's underneath the sun, that all of it is a hevel. Hevel means substanceless, and it comes from an evil spirit. Those are the words that the Alter Rebbe uses to introduce us to the levushim of the Nefesh HaBahamis. In other words, to the behavior, not to the theory of the levushim, not to the higoyim, what the levushim mean, but what the levushim do. What is the philosophy to explain this? What is the higoyim that supports this statement? It's quite strong, yeah? Nefesh HaLekis learns Teirah and does mitzvahs. The Prophet does what? Whatever you do under the sun. Whatever you do under the sun, hakele hevel v'rois ruach. Se pust u'met a schlechter Geist. You have to learn Yiddish. What can I tell you? It's pust means it's substanceless and has an evil spirit. So this has been the issue that's been consuming us the last couple of classes, is to understand what does that mean? What's the category? And the category basically is as follows. And of course, basically is a big bad word, as you all know. And this is the basic category. When you look at life from a point of view of Nigla de Teda, you have Chayv, and you have Isir, and you have Reshus. When you look at life from a practical point of view, what I called in the classes, if you could remember, Teda Leiba Shamayimi, there's things that you have to do, that's called mitzvahs. There's things that you're not allowed to do, that's called Avedis. And there's everything in between. Everything, there's so much is in between. It's nishka mitzvah, it's nishka Aveda, and it's nuftachon Reshus. Reshus means it's free. Do what else, do as you wish. It's called Reshus. It's called Reshus. It's called free. It's a middle dimension. And in Nigla de Teda, Reshus is exactly that. It's benign. It's padev. It doesn't have a leaning this way or this way. You should know there's a great word in Russian. We use the word in Yiddish, but we misuse the word. This Russian word does not have an English equivalent. And the word is prosta. Prosta. Prost. Now in Yiddish, prost has a negative connotation. That's what the word prost has come to mean. When you hear Russians use the word prosta, what you find is that the word means plain, or mamish plain. No charge, no electrical charge, not this way and not this way. Plain, without any leaning this way or this way. There is no word in the English language that as precisely and as concisely articulates what it means that you do something without a leaning. You're not leaning this way. That's what the word means. Prosta means stam, plain. But somehow in English, the words always lean you in a one direction. Either it's good or it's bad. The word prosta means it's not good, it's not bad, it's prost, plain, stam. So I'm using the Russian word because not that I speak a lot of Russian, but it makes the point. There is something called stam. A Yid does something stam. Where does it belong? So in Nigla de Teda, stam is called Reshus. The Eibishter doesn't mix in. The Eibishter mixes into what you must. The Eibishter mixes in other words, to what's good. The Eibishter mixes into what's bad. The Eibishter doesn't mix into what's plain. Stam, what's prosta, what's ordered, doesn't belong to a camp or another. Again, to use a physics term, it has no charge, there's no electricity. It's not pulling in this direction. It's not positive, it's not negative, it's neutral.
Can you give an example?
Example, taking a walk in the park is an example. Eating breakfast, going shopping, wearing clothes. Most of life is in this category. Most of life. Now you're starting to get smart. But when you learn Chochmas HaKabbalah, which we called in our previous classes Teda Bashamayim, Teda understood Bashamayim, there's no such thing as neutral. That's the dead hand. That's the pain of this Pedic here, which basically says there's only two sides. There's no center. There's Sitra de Gedusha and there's Sitra Achara. There's the side of holiness, and then there's not the side of unholiness. There's the other side. Pirush tzad acher she'ein tzad kedusha. That's the rub. That's the intensity. That's the nervousness that the Alter Rebbe has been. I don't think the Alter Rebbe is nervous. I think we're nervous when he's teaching us this Peidik Vav. And that's the meaning of that quotable quote: Kol ha'ma'asim asher nasim tachas hashemesh. If you do something and it's not holy, you should know that it's Tachas HaShemesh, and you should know that it's Hevel, and you should know that it comes from a Ruach Ra, which is not so comfortable. It's not comfortable at all. But this is the idea of learning Pnimiyas HaTeira. In other words, the difference between learning Teira on the level of Nigla, Teira Lei Bashamayim, and learning Teira on the level of Nista, Teira Bashamayim, he is this. That in Nigla de Teda there's a huge swath, a huge shtikele of life that the Eibishter says, it's your department. Ich mish dich nicht dahin. But when you're learning the Torah on the level of Pnimius, the Alter Rebbe says this is the way it is. There's Teva and there's Ra, period. There is Teva and there is Ra. Or to say it differently, there is Toiv and there is Tzad Acha she'enei Tzad HaTeiv. That's basically what the Alter Rebbe is presenting. That's basically what the Alter Rebbe is teaching. That's basically the Alter Rebbe's perspective. Therefore, the definition of bad is very different, you see. In Nigla Torah, the word bad is probably what you and I would be most comfortable with calling evil. Stealing is bad. Rachmanos, taking somebody's life is bad. Lying, cheating, deceiving, being jealous, being vengeful. Must I go on? So this is the Alter Rebbe's argument that Al Pi Pnimis Al Pi Kabbalah. There's Tzad Teva, there's Tzad Ra. Now, in our conversations, as we explored this, as we developed this, I brought into the discussion the word tumah, which is not mentioned in this Perek, but it is mentioned in other Perakim. And the reason I wanted to bring in the word tumah is because I wanted to help us find form or language for this idea that neutral is not neutral. That's basically why I did it. Now, the Alter Rebbe doesn't use the word tumah. He uses the word rois ruach ra, which is basically, I guess, more or less the same idea. But this has been the topic of the last 2 classes, possibly the last 3 classes. This notion that in a higher level, in Pnimis HaTorah, we're not talking here halacha, we're talking about a higher standard, a higher madrege. And a higher madrege, there's either serving the Eibishter, and if it's not serving the Eibush, you have to live from somewhere, and you're living from Kli. This is the perspective of the Tanya that we have until now. Now, in light of this, the Alter Rebbe began to explain to us what I guess you would call the pathology of Klippa. What is Klippa? The pathology. Klippa doesn't start in this world. Klippa starts at the very, very highest levels. Klippa starts at the very high levels. You have Klippa in Bria, and the truth is you even have Klippa in Atzilus. But Vajuden, as they state in Chassidus from Kabbalah, that the Klippa of Atzilus lives in Elam Abriya. Atzilus has a Klippa, but it doesn't have a location. It doesn't have a neighborhood. So the Klippa of Atzilus lives in Elam Abriya. For those who are not familiar, it says in Chassidus that the Klippa of Atzilus is called the Ru'uma. In the end of Pashas Vayera, Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu come back from the Akedas Yitzchak, and they find out Hine Yolda Milka Bonam Lenochel Achichem, that Abraham's brother had many children, but not like him that he come and had one. His brother had 12 kids, 12 children. The 12 children are 8 from Ben HaGevira. 8 of those children are from a wife, and 4 are from Ben HaShivcha, are from a concubine, a concubine, not a Pelegish, which is exactly the same thing as Yankov would have. Yankov also had 8 children from Bnei HaGevira, from Leah and Rachel, and 4 children from Bnei HaShivcha, from Bilhah and Zilpah. Avraham finds out that his brother also had 12 kids. Now, then it happens 2 generations before. So you see, sometimes waiting is worth it. Yeah, Milka, Nocher has 12 kids, ein Rosh HaGeras 2. Yankov waits 2 generations and he has 12 children in Choron, and it's Mitase Shlema, you understand? So sometimes waiting is worthwhile. There's a whole story of the Jewish people is waiting. And amongst this, so the reason the Pasha is written there is because Rivka is introduced to the story, yeah? But the last pasuk of the Pasha is Upilaksha Yishmorayum, that this guy, Nocher, Avram's brother, has 12 sons, 8 from a wife and 4 from a concubine. The last pasuk in the Pasha identifies them. Upilaksha, his concubine, his, like Rashi says, a wife without ksuba, and kedusha without ksuba, and Nadan, I forgot what Rashi says the Lashon, her name was Re'uma. And they had 4 children, Vatela, Gami, as Tevach, V'ez Gacham, V'ez Tachash, V'ez Macha. That's how Pashas Vayera finishes. The name of this Pilegesh is Re'uma. So it says in Kabbalah that the Klippa of Atzilus is called Re'uma. Zeh Bittel. Re'uma si ma, chochma koyach ma means bittel. V'nachnu mo, right? When the Torah's term, the biblical term for total bittel to Hashem is memei. Moshe Rabbeinu is mo leinut l'nesechem kiel avayim. Right? Moshe and Aharon, when they talk about themselves, they say v'nachnu mo. We are bittel, we are garnished, nothing. So there's a klipa which is called Ru'uma. Siyam bittel, you understand? Siyam, this is the klipa of Atzilus. It's taka bittel, but it wants to be noticed. You understand? It's called Nechsidus Murgash. So there's a klipa comes from a very high shadish. So the Alter Rebbe here in Perek Vav in chapter 6 gives you a bit of the pathology of klipa. And I told you already last Sunday, that we're not going to do it now. We're going to save this conversation for chapter 19, for Perek Yutes, with the Alter Rebbe, not Yutes, chapter 22, Perek Chav. With the Alter Rebbe dedicates an entire Perek. Really, there's a whole Perek to understanding the idea of klipa, that there's something called Bi'iri B'Tzimtzumim, and Acherayim, and Makif, and so on and so forth. We're going to leave that conversation for later. But based on what we have here, from what the Alter Rebbe here teaches us in the Tanya, this idea that even though Al Pi Nigla there's three things, Al Pi Nista there's only two. Al Pi Nigla there's Chayv and Isser in the shoes, and Al Pi Nista there's Tzad HaKedusha, and there's Tzad Achet, the other side. Pirish Tzad Achet, right? So he's supposed to lush inside. Kol HaMaisim Asher Nasim Tachas HaShemesh Asher Akel Lehevel V'Rois Ruach. That's the label, right? It doesn't have to be bad to be klipa, has to just be not good. Kedusha is bittul, klipa is everything else. So the Alter Rebbe gives us a very, very brief discussion on the hishtalshelus of klipa. That, like I said, we're going to be learning in Mitzvah Hashem at length in chapter 22 and Perek Chav Beis. I'm leaving that conversation for there. The nekuda that you need to understand is that klipa doesn't start off gross. Gross. Now, gross means disgusting, but gross also means macro as opposed to micro, big as opposed to tiny. Klipa starts off teeny tiny little chesaron. In a higher level becomes a much more massive chesaron and a much lower level. And if you're familiar with the Maimorim, when the Maimorim talk about the evolution of klipa, the very first nekuda of klipa is hergish atzmei, is feeling yourself. Feeling yourself in your Avodas Hashem, mind you. Feeling yourself, the Adam and Chava felt themselves after they ate from the Eitz Hadas, Teva Ra, Vayedu Ki Eirumim Hema. They noticed themselves. Adam and Chava were very big tzaddikim with incredibly high neshamas, but their seeing themselves is the beginning of the story. First you start to notice yourself, and then you start taking up space, and then you start pushing the Eibishter out of some of that space in which you occupy, until you reach a point where you have to deny the Eibishter from your space completely, or you have to deny the Eibishter miklal, because there's no room for him and you to be in the same space. So klipa starts off very darkistic, very edel, and in his falshal, there's a klipa in El Mabriya, there's a klipa in El Mayitzira, there's a klipa in El Ma'asiyah, and then there's klipa in El Mazah. And if you're familiar with it, in the Ruchnistic world, there's only klipa snake. In the spiritual worlds, there's no denial of God. There isn't even afsalachas, there isn't even defiance of God. There's a simply, I exist also. There's a jostling for space. Hashem is talking everything, but there's me too. You understand? In Elam Hazeh, that flips around, where it's, I'm everything, the Eibishter, let's think about it, you understand? In the Ruchnis, even in Asiyah HaRuchnis, there's only Klipas Neg. There's no shoulders Klipas Meis. Klipas Meis, Verois Lagamri, you only have in Elam Hazeh. But it starts in the higher worlds. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is trying to sort of develop, to help us understand this foundation that he established, that when you look at the reality from a perspective of Pnimis HaTeira, it's this or this, there's no in-between. Now, what was the term that I told you that I wanted to discuss? There was one idea that I did want to discuss, and I guess I'll do this. I'll start from Avo. The line that begins with the word Shchinta, it's Yud Amid Beis, it's page 20. The line that begins with the word Shchinta, I don't have a remember Tanya, but I'm going to guesstimate it's more than halfway down the page. If you're looking on page 20, It's where the gimel is. If you have a Tanya with a chitas, with a number, it's where the aval, where the gimel is. Yeah, it's about 12 lines from the bottom. It's more than halfway down page 20. And we're going to read inside. Aval, however, kol ma she'enei batalat liyizbarach, by the simple fact, by the virtue of the fact that one is not bottled, just not being bottled to the Eibishter, elo davar nifra l'fnei, but instead one is an entity that is separated unto himself. That's already klipa. That's already tachas hashemesh. That's already hevel. And what's worse, that's already ra ruach. Why? Because eini mekabel chayes with the shasar shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You cannot get life from the holiness of the Meibishter. Bebechinas pnimius hakedusha, from the revelation of holiness. Umuhusa v'atzmusa, and its substance and its essence as it exists by itself. Bechveida v'atzma, as it exists in relationship with itself. You see, the point that's the philosophical issue is that if you are alive, someone's giving you life. We believe in souls. We believe in souls. We believe in neshamas. We don't only believe in neshamas that big tzaddikim have souls. We believe that a stone has a soul. If anything exists that takes up space and passes through time, and it has a definition, it means a form, a shape, a color, a texture, a purpose, there's life there. Even a diamond, a mineral has life. Everything in the world has life. Everything in the world has life. There's life in everything. There's life in every place. Wherever you look, there's life. Okay? Life comes from Hashem. So you should know that life comes in two flavors. I didn't see him. Sorry, without the glasses, I'm no good. Or I'm very good, actually. Yeah. Good morning. Life comes in two flavors. What are the two flavors of life? Flavor number one of life is life that says thank you. Flavor number two of life says, it's very hard for me to say thank you. Why? Because if I say thank you, then I have to give away some of what you gave me. We call this Kedusha. Kedusha says thank you. Kedusha lives from the Eibishter and has no problem acknowledging it. Klipa lives from the Eibishter, and it's very difficult for Klipa to acknowledge it. Depending on the severity of the Klipa, that's how difficult it is, or easy it is, relatively speaking, for them to say thank you, and how convoluted and confused and entangled and conditional and veiled the thanks will be. But that's the basic point. Kedusha means Pashat. I live from God and I admit it. You look at me, you see that I am being sustained by a being bigger than me. That's Kedusha. Klipa is I'm living from the Eibishter, but I can't admit it. Now why I can't admit it is an interesting question. Is it psychological? Is it physiological? Is it whatever it is? The Eibishter had to solve Bashaf. Hashem created Klipa. But the Metzias is, the fact is that in order for something to be Klipa, all it needs to be is not being able to say thank you. So Chassidus says, when one lives in every moment of life, in every event of life, in every circumstance of life, you have to get life from someplace. You can't live from nowhere. You can't live from neutral. You have to live from life. And there's two lives, there's two kinds of neshamas. There's a life that says thank you, that's called Kedusha. We have life that cannot say thank you, that's called Klipa, and you're getting even nearer here. We call them a Nefesh Alakis and a Nefesh Bahamas, and on a lower level we call them a Yetzer Tev and a Yetzer Hara. You got to live other von Danent, other von Da, either from here or from here. There's no neutral, there's no between.
Yeah, it gets mixed up.
I'm in it, please. So the Alter Rebbe says that when we exist as entities that are separate from Hashem, we cannot live from Kedusha. Because if our actions are separate from the Eibishter, we can't be living from a neshama whose whole metzias is acknowledging the Eibishter, is connection to the Eibishter, is dependency upon the Eibishter, and so forth and so on. That's what the word of the Rebbe says. Ella, reading it inside again, hu davar nifrad b'fnei atzmi, it's an entity which is separate and unto itself. So the Rebbe says, when we live this way, or we make decisions on those bases, that those instances I'm not receiving life. From the holiness of the Eibishter. From holiness as it's revealed. And its substance. I'll translate atzmusa as essence, even though I don't like the word essence. It exists in relationship with itself. In Gedusha, it's very plain. I get from God and I'm connected to God. In Klipa, I get from God, but I gotta play games. In other words, psychological problems didn't start in Asiya, it starts in Briya. The whole business of being an ingrate has a very high source. Says Rebbe B'Meila. But I gotta live. I have to live from somewhere. I can't have no life. So if I am doing an action which is not an expression of connection and oneness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I can't live from Kedusha, no. So what am I going to live from? Only have one other choice. That's the point. There's no three choices. There's no fleishiks, milchiks, and parat. You understand? There's fleishiks and milchiks. And because there's fleishiks and milchiks, because there's bittul to the Eibishter and not bittul to the Eibishter, when I'm engaged in activities which are not bittul to the Eibishter, my life has to come from the other side. There's no other source. There's no third location. So let's read it inside. I'm still living from the Eibishter. Of course I'm living from the Eibishter. Why, if I'm doing something which is not bittul to the Eibishter, I'm living from the Eibishter? I'll tell you the answer. This may come as a shock to you. Because there's nothing besides for God. Period. The end. Full stop. There's only one God. That's it. Then I'm making another one. We're stuck with the Eibishter. You know what I'm saying? The Eibishter is the Eibishter. So it's called Acharayim. I'm living from the Eibishter, but I'm living from the Eibishter with my back turned. I'm living from the Eibishter the kind of way where I can get away with not being submissive, where I can get away with not being bubble. That life comes from here. But first of all, it passes through many steps. Myriads of steps, which are the chain reactions of worlds. That all through the principles of cause and effect. In multiple contractions. Until that the life is so diminished, it's so concealed. Now I want you to understand that there's a missing link here. It's not really a missing link, it's just the Alter Rebbe is not giving you the full version. And as I said to you before, this discussion which we have here, but we're going to have Ba'arichis and Perek Chav Beis, I'm going to leave it for there. The first requirement for the creation of a klipa is called the Ribit Tzimtzum, little bit of life. The second requirement for the creation of klipa is called Acharayim. Acharayim means the Eibishter turns his back. Here you have both of these points, but in the reverse order. You see? The first thing he says is Acharayim, and then he says Ribit Tzimtzum. Now I'm not going to start analyzing why, it's above my pay grade, and ich weiß nicht von anderen solche Sachen. This is edel Sachen. These are very deep in Yonim in Kabbalah. But there's two requirements, two basic requirements. Number one, if Klipa has too much life, it's going to know it comes from the Eibishter, even if the Eibishter's back is turned. And that has a name, by the way. The Eibishter giving Klipa a lot of life with his back turned has to admit the Eibishter what his name is. I'll tell you his name, but don't tell him what I told you, yeah? His name is Elam Atayu. Have you heard of Elam Atayu? Elam Atayu is very safe. And he's not beseder. So there's a lack of bittul. You understand? So the normal process for sustaining klipa has these two requirements in the order that's not in this page. It's the order in chapter 22. First, it's called riboy tzimtzum. Life has to be very diminished. And the second is called acharayim. Hashem turns his back. He's giving you $1 in such a way that you don't see where the hand is. You don't see what the hand is getting to. If someone gives you $1, all you have is $1. As opposed to someone gives you $1 and gives you a little bit of love. The little bit of love you can't buy a sandwich with. But that little bit of love, what's called in halacha hamafaiseh, when you give the poor person money and you make him feel good, that's worth so much more than $1. Even though you can't buy breakfast with it. I always tell you the story that Mrs. Pekarsky, she used to sit right here. Allah Hashalom, she told me that when they first came to America, they didn't have the nishgahat. She was a woman with incredible dignity. You've never seen a more dignified woman. But she was, part of her dignity was, you gotta do what you gotta do. So she Pashit went to ask Nadavis. She told this to me in class. She asked people for money. She knocked on doors, said, I just came from Europe. I need a fadovit. Pashit breit. So she knocked on the door of Mrs. Gordon. Yechanan Gordon's Rebbe said, her name was Zisha. They lived across the street in Eastern Parkway, and she let her into the apartment. And she explained to her why she's there, and Mrs. Gordon gave her money and then said to her, "A dank for an kommen beten. Thanks for asking." I wouldn't have known. Thank you for asking. That's not giving. It didn't increase how much she gave, but it increased what it meant. She told me the story probably 50 years after it happened. It was at the Sibigalep. She re-experienced the story, maybe even more. You understand? That's called mafaise. So acharayim means you get $1 or $100 and $1,000, and it's connected to nothing. It's connected to nothing. There's no hand and there's no body. It's just money. It's called acharayim. So klipa lives from the Meibishter, but it doesn't have to acknowledge, doesn't have to say thank you, because the Meibishter is giving very little, and he's giving it in a way which is his back turned. So klipa says, "Samsa poshnik, I made it myself. Liya eriv ani asisini, on my own mitzias." Okay, but there's one more concept here, and it's this last concept that I wanted to discuss with you. It's possible for the life of klipa, which happens through a process that's called ribit tzimtzum, and happens through a process which is called acharayim, to achieve a station that is called the bechinas golus. It is exiled. Toich oisei dover, within that thing, hanifred, which is separate from Elokus, la'achayesei, to give it life, or l'kaimen, to give it existence, mi'ayin liyesh, that even though it's bringing it forward from a non-existential state into an independent, the word yesh means separate, independent state. It should not return to its non-existential condition, as it was Mekedim Sheniv before it was created. Yeah? So the Alter Rebbe, what's he saying? Hashem is making you every single second, and you walk around denying your dependency upon Him. That's a chush, that's not McKenna. We're good at that, yeah? That's what Klipa is. Klipa lives from the Eibishter and denies the Eibishter. What's the tight Golus? Golus means it can't help itself. It can't help itself. Golus means it can't help itself. Last class, when we were running out of time, I said I wanted to go back and do Golus. And I spent too much time repeating myself. I mean, this has become a whole class. It was supposed to be a few minutes. Okay, I want to discuss with you the concept of Golus. You have in Tanya in chapter 19, in Perishit Tes, two ideas. One is called Shina, and the other is called Golus. One is called sleep, and the other is called exile. What's the difference between being asleep and being in exile? When a person is asleep, they have to wake up. That's all. When a person is asleep, all they have to do is wake up. What do they need to wake up? They don't need anybody from outside of them to wake up. They can wake themselves up. They just need something to make them realize that they're sleeping and they need to be awake. What about a person who's in jail? A person who's in prison? Huh? A person who's in jail, a person who's in prison, the very definition of being in jail is that somebody else is holding the key. You're sitting in a box, the door is locked, someone else has the key. If you hold the key to your own jail cell, then you're not a prisoner. In the Gemara you have an expression. And the expression of the Gemara comes along with a story. What's the story in the Gemara? That there's two different stories, one after the other in the Gemara. But an Ameda was ill. An Ameda was sick. So his friend comes to see him. And his friend says to him, Ahanyech alecha yeshurim. Are you happy about your suffering? Are you happy about your suffering? So the friend answers, Lo mehem v'lo mischarim. You have to understand, tzaddikim have different measures for these things. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm doing it. I remember the Rebbe saying in the summer of 1991, and I'll never forget it, it rings in my head, when the Rebbe came not well, Le'aleinu, this tortured me for those 2 years and change. The Rebbe said, Chof of Tavshin Nun Aleph, the last Yortzeit of his father, or it was Vaftishin and Beis. It was months before the stroke, it was less than the stroke. It was either when the Rebbe's father had Yortzeit, the last one before the stroke, or his mother. This is a direct quote. The Tate had Zeiche gewend zu leiden Yisurim begashmis. Ad kam l'shen HaKadosh. That's verbatim. My father merited to suffer Yisurim begashmis. I remember I was standing right below where I'm standing right now. I remember where I was standing. I remember the Rebbe saying the words. It was part of it. You know, the Rebbe said so much that you had no time to digest. You just talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. But every line was a world. But those words, I'll never forget. The Tata, can you imagine a person should say about his own father? The Rebbe said about his own father. The Tata had Zeche gewinnt zu leiden, Yisum was a words, direct quote. I remember listening to those words. I was very young then. I was married, but I was a baby. I'm still a baby, but I was for sure then, at least then I didn't even know I was a baby. But I remember thinking, gosh, it's Rebbe. You know, we know tzaddikim are in a higher madrege, but you got to say it. You know, there's a whole sugi b'sechta about Metzia about what's called Yisurim Shel Ahava. You should go understand what these things mean. The only reason for the Yisurim is because the Eibishter loves you. Sometimes you have Yisurim Shel Yira. It's a punishment for you, for another guy. Tzaddikim, understand, if we understood tzaddikim, so we would go mad. Either we'd have to be tzaddikim ourselves, or we go out of our minds. But the people of different kinds of Yisurim. So when a tzaddik meets a tzaddik and he says to him, you like the Yisurim? It's a legitimate question. Someone comes to you and says, you know, you have a backache. You're happy about the backache? What are you drinking that cup? Will you give me another backache? Get rid of it. You understand? But in the Gemara you have this exchange where it says the names. I forgot the names. Shmuel and Rabbi Yehuda. I forgot. I'm sorry. But there's two Gemaras, one after the next. The reason you have two Gemaras is because in the first story, one comes to fix his friend, and in the second story, he's the one who needs fixing. So let's say Rabbi Yehuda comes to whoever, and I forgot the names of the people, and he says to him, "Ahanya lacha yisurim, you happy about your suffering?" So he answers, "Lo mehem v'lo mischarim, I don't want the suffering, and I don't want the reward." So he tells him, "Psheit liyadach, give me your hand." So he gives him his hand, he shakes his hand, and boom, he's gesund, he's back, he's healthy. A tzaddik pulls off azal min ma'aseh. For those who do not know, the first act that the Tzemach Tzedek did as a Rebbe was this. Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe at Shuas Tov Kuf Pei Ches, and as soon as he made it official, he went to see Rabbi Isaac Homelech, who was an old chassid, and Rabbi Isaac Homelech was ill. He had come to Lubavitch to be in Lubavitch for Shuas, and he got sick. And the Tzemach Tzedek said to him, "Psheit liyadach, give me your hand." And the Tzemach Tzedek took his hand and he shook it. Rabbi Isaac Homelech lived another 19 years after that. Tamaise. So then the Gemara continues that this same Amoire who had said to his Chaver, "Give me your hand," and he healed him, became sick himself. And he was visited by his friend. And his friend says to him the exact same words. You're happy about the Yisurim, but they get end for the I don't want the Yisurim, I don't want the Schar. So his friend tells him, "Psheit liyadach, give me your hand." He gave him your hand, and he stood up. As they steht in the Gemara. The Gemara asks an obvious question. I don't understand. In story A, this person was the healer. In story B, he is the healed. Now, if he was able to heal somebody else, why can't he heal himself? And for the Gemara, these are direct words. You've heard this word before. A captive cannot redeem himself from his own captivity. The nature of prison is someone else has the key. And prison doesn't necessarily mean a physical box. There's a lot of boxes in our head. The meaning of I am stuck, the meaning that I am in prison, the meaning that I am in exile, is that I have no control over myself. That in this area, I'm a prisoner. And I cannot redeem myself. I need somebody outside of me to provide my redemption. That's the meaning of Golus. So Golus doesn't mean I'm stuck. Golus means I'm so stuck I can't unstick myself. Only somebody else, only something else can unstick me. That's the criteria, that's the definition, that's the category of Golus. What the Rabbi says in Tanya, on the Neshama, the Yechida can only be asleep. It can't be in Golus. The lower levels of the Neshama could be in Golus. Therefore, we make all kinds of excuses for the things that we do that were not good because we have no control. Until it comes to the when it comes to the question, yid, no yid, as they say in Yiddish, are you inside or outside? All of a sudden, the neshama wakes up, and the yid is mesa nefesh. Why? Because the Yechidish Nefesh, the Chochmash Nefesh, the Pintel Yid is never in Golus, it's only sleeping. And when you touch it, it wakes up. But besides, for the Pintel Yid, when you're talking about Klippa, what makes Klippa is not that it's separate from the Eibishter, is that it's separate from the Eibishter in the kind of way that it cannot fix itself. You understand? That's the meaning of this word, Golus. Golus. Golus means the Eibishter created two kinds of life. He created the kind of life which is called Pnimius Eshal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What are the words? Pnimius HaKedusha, Umuhusa Vatzmusa V'Chayda V'Yatzma. Pnimius HaKedusha, Umuhusa Vatzmusa V'Chayda V'Yatzma means I'm living from the Eibishter, and the Eibishter is obviously available to me. In other words, I'm saying thank you. And then there's I'm living from the Eibishter, there's an Ibitzim Tzumim, and there's an Acharayim, and then there's a Golus. Golus means my condition of living from the Eibishter in the kind of way where I cannot say thank you, I can't fix by myself. That's the definition of Klippa. As long as somebody is in a position to fix themselves, Alter Rebbe called it earlier, Bittul B'Koyach, and potentially Bittul. Klippa means I'm separate from the Eibishter, and I by myself cannot reattach myself to the Eibishter. I by myself cannot reattach myself to the Eibishter. That's the meaning of the word Golus. And that's Klippa. So now the greater point is that either you live from this or you live from this. Now in Elmas Hal Yenim, in the spiritual worlds, Klippa is much more ego. You understand? Klippa, somebody once asked me, what's worse? A person who enjoys material indulgences, or a person who enjoys all of these new age spiritualities? Some people are spiritual people. They're not Bali Taiva. They're not, I don't know what word to use. They're not involved in materialism in the grubber sense of the word. But they love all of these alternative forms of spirituality. Alternative forms of spirituality are not, they're fine, they're edel, yeah? But sometimes those alternative forms of spirituality, all their edelkeit, can be ultimately much, much worse than the person who's involved in taiva on a basic level. Because it's so sweet. It's so padev, it's so harmless, it's so refined, but it's klippa, you understand? What is klippa? Klippa means separate. What is klippa? Klippa means separate in the kind of a way that's called golos. It can't become reconnected to the Meibishter. Which is why when you talk about alternative spirituality, be very careful. It has to have a hechsher. Because it can mislead you without even realizing, without you even realizing. Someone wants you to do an Aveda, you know exactly what he wants. Someone comes to you with an alternative method of healing or meditation, and it's coming from Tumah, and you don't realize until it's Metameh the Nefesh that this has occurred. So this is called Klippa. So the technical limud that we did so far is that Klippa lives from Hashem. Klippa lives from Hashem because there's only one God, there's no two gods. And the Klippa lives from Hashem through Ribitim Tzumim, through Acharayim and Golus. And in the spiritual world, you have spiritual Klippas. Down here, everything is black and white in a way. V'lachein, I'm reading a little bit more. Therefore, this world and the world, everything inside of it, is called Eila Maklipes V'Siterach. It's the world of Klippa, and it's the world of the other side. Now, of course, there's different aspects to this statement, that this world is the world of Klippa and Sitra Achra. The first statement is that to be Klippa and Sitra Achra, you don't got to be that bad. You have to just be not the bottom. That's all. You understand? V'lachein, this is why Nikra Elam Hazeh, this world is called Elam HaKlippa V'Sitra Achra, because in spiritual terms, when one is not bottle, when one is separate, that's already klippa. I believe the Alter Rebbe uses the word v'lachein because he spoke in the line before about Yeshmayayim. Okay? But the closest idea, the basic idea is, if you are alive, you're getting life from someplace. And you're either getting life from here or you're getting life from someplace else. So if you're bottled at the Eibush, you're getting life from Kedusha. If not above the Eibush, you're getting life from what we call Sitra Achara. Let's read a couple of Nacham Bisalim. V'lachein, moreover, and therefore, against Nacham o V'lachein, Kol Ma'asi Elam Hazeh Kosher V'Rayv. What happens in this world is hard and evil. V'Arashoyim gave and obeyed. This world is ruled by evil people. This is very strong, yeah? Alter Rebbe says, everything in this world is tough. Right? In Kabbalah it says, the Rubik Kuleira, and the vast majority it's evil. Here the Alter Rebbe says, Kol Ma'aseh Elamazeh, everything in this world that happens is kosher, it's hard, V'ra and evil, V'rashoyim Gever, it's ruled by evil people, Kamesha Koso Beitz Chayim Sharma Beitz like it says in Kabbalah. In the spiritual world is Klippas. In this world is Klippas, but they're not the same. In the spiritual world is Klippas, but they're sweet, and that's not necessarily a mile, yeah, but it's not so overt. In this world is Klippa, and the Klippas are also severe, which is why the Alter Rebbe moves on to the next point. And what's the next point? Elosha Klippas. But as far as this world is concerned, when you're talking about Klippas, it's divided up into two levels. What are the two levels? Zula Mata Mizu, one lower than the next. Hamadrega Tachtena, the lower level, is called Sholish Klippas Atmeyes Velois Lagamri. There's three Klippas that are unclean. And here you see the word Tumah, yes? And totally evil. Now, I'm not going to be reading the rest of this. I want you to do me a favor and turn to Peirik Zayin. If you remember last week, I actually showed it to you inside, right? If you in the next page, the bottom of this page, yeah. If you turn to page 22, yeah. Third line from the top, it says Mi Madrego Hashenis Shabaklipa L'Sederacha. There's another level of L'Sederacha, which is more edel, yeah. Hanikra. Klipa Shi Klipa Reviz, it's the fourth Klipa. Hanikras Klipas Nega, Klipa which is called Nega, that means of a dim light. Shabela Mazeh, which is in this world, and Nikela Masiya, which is Rubik Kuleira. But here the Alter Rebbe says, Rakma'atei words, a little bit of good mixed in. When you're talking about the spiritual worlds, there's Klipa. You're talking about the physical world, there's Klipa, and then there's Klipa. Okay, we'll continue this in Mitzvah Hashem next.